Recently, I've had the chance to pick up a few heavy swords, so if you watched my previous unboxing videos, you probably saw a few of them. And if you haven't, this is probably a good prompt to suggest you do check out those unboxing videos and maybe even subscribe for more sword content. But if you did watch them, one of the swords I unboxed was this. This is an Italian 1860 Cavalry sabre, and this is what we're going to be looking at today. One disclaimer, or rather a word of caution perhaps, is that when trying to learn about Italian swords, the environment you kind of have to navigate can be more complicated than what initially may seem. And this is because certain design elements may be recurrent across multiple models, but then there's an extra layer of difficulty in that a lot of models have a bunch of variations. Some of these swords had a rather long service life, so across the decades they were reworked and remanaged into official variations. So that's something that you need to understand. And also non-official variations. So of course we know that 19th century military personnel often personalized their weapons, especially in the case of officers. And this means that we don't always have weapons that match exactly the specifications you may be looking at if you're looking at like the official regulations. This, however, as you may easily be able to tell from the munitions grade style of construction, and I say that in an absolutely non-disparaging way, this is a sword that was meant for use, is a trooper's sword. It's not an officer's sword. But definition fool you. Just because it's a trooper's sword doesn't mean it wasn't designed with elite use in mind as well. And by elite use, I mean that this was the first weapon adopted by the Italian corazzieri. Corazzieri, as the word probably easily gives away, is the Italian translation of cuirassier. And these were elite troop, which was the guard of the king, as long as Italy was a monarchy, of course. The corazzieri, by the way, still exist. They are now the guard of the President of the Republic, if I'm not mistaken. And you often see them in very formal settings, like when heads of state are coming to Italy, and you'll see them along the doors or guarding like the passage, and they have those typical 19th century kind of helmets with the plumes. But coming back to the original time of use of this sword, 1860, we're talking basically the year before the unification of Italy. So it's really at the end stage of the unification wars, the wars of the Risorgimento, but it comes into action just on time to be used for some of the important final battles of the Italian unification. So it has a technically it's a pre-unification sword, I suppose, but 90% of its history is in service of Italy as a unified country. It is, as I mentioned earlier already, and in my unboxing video, a heavy and rather unwieldy blade. It comes in at a weight of about 1,200 grams, so 1 kilo and a quarter about. And this means it is quite hard to maneuver. However, it doesn't, you do get used to it. I mean, I'm not wielding it in full swing, but let's say moving it a little, you do get used to it. And of course, this is a cavalry sword, so it's not meant to be used in a duel setting, let's say. It's meant for a charge. However, Calamandrei, in his book Armi Bianche Italiane, does mention that it did require intensive training for the users to be able to, well, extract the maximum benefit from it, I suppose. And it's interesting that it was used in this case by the corazzieri, because by requirement, corazzieri need to be rather large men. So they have like a rather high minimum height limit, and they're usually really big guys. So accordingly, the weapon that was selected for them is something that they would be able to wield maybe a little more comfortably than the average person. And just before we dive into looking at this one close up and in detail, I just want to address a question that perhaps some of you may have, and that is, okay, this is a trooper's sword, but what did officers use? Well, the answer is that officers used a variation to this. The hilt would have been the same, but the blade would have been a 1855 style blade. So the 1855, I haven't done a deep dive into it yet. I've done a cleaning video about it though. And if you are familiar with it, it's lighter, smaller, a little more manageable. It still has a slight curve, and it has a characteristic clipped tip. It's a very beautiful blade actually, and obviously officers didn't need to carry all of this weight. They could be a little more comfortable. Okay, with all of that out of the way, let's move into our close-up. And here we are at the close-up section of the video. So before I forget, and since I didn't mention it while I was actually on camera, Matt Ford, the author of La Sciabola, which is a important research book on Italian swords, please check the review video I made if you haven't yet. But anyway, since I'm talking about Italian swords, he kindly thought of supporting the channel by providing some free copies of his book. So I'll be giving away one download code basically for every Italian sword I talk about in the coming weeks. So in this case, just comment under the video, let me know that you would like the book, and I don't know, you can give a reason or not, I don't really mind, as long as you're interested in having it. And then as, let's say, within a week or two after enough comments have been received, I'll select a random person that will receive the download code. So anyway, good luck with that, and let's get into the sword. So if you are familiar with Italian heavy cavalry sabers, you will see some very recognizable characteristics. Each model kind of varies a lot in terms of the details, but overall we have, I would say, this sheet metal kind of guard, so it's less branches and more of a almost basket hilt with a cutout section, usually like a drop cutout section you see here. And in many cases it has this cylindrical kind of ending, which kind of pops out underneath the section where the guard connects to the grip. However, there are some big differences between one model and the other. In any case, we'll check this one today, of course. So what we have here is generally a heavier metal here than you find on later versions, like the 1873 or the 1873-71-09. For instance, this is actually a rather tough, I almost wouldn't really call it sheet metal in the sense that it's a rather thick piece of protective gear, and holding it, you really feel very well protected. As is the case for other Italian swords like this, the inside of the hand is very open, but the outside here section is really kind of well covered. Another interesting thing I would like to mention here is this small ridge you see here. This is, I have the feeling, I don't have a confirmation for it, but I have the feeling is to kind of guide any tip hits towards the inside of the hand, to move them away, or to at least not invite them to slip off the side, the unprotected side, into the arm or the body perhaps. But other than that, we have the usual lanyard section here in a very, this is, I think, an unusual position. It's common on some Italian swords, but it's not where you would normally find it on a lot of international versions of swords. And this kind of, again, confirms the Italian, I think, flair for experimentation at the time and unusual design choices. I think the Albertina is the epitome of this kind of search for the unusual and the unconventional. Anyway, if we look at the grip here, we'll see, let me get a close-up. But we'll see it has a leather wrapping over wood. And actually what's interesting about this one is that you get to see the leather which is peeling off. And you would expect it to be, I feel, at least that's my expectation, I would have thought it would be way thicker, like almost like belt leather or something like that. Instead, it's a very, very delicate, almost feels like paper. So it's no surprise it's getting damaged, because let's say after almost 200 years, I would be surprised if it didn't. But that's something worth noticing. You also see this copper binding. It's kind of come loose here, but towards the bottom here you see that it was originally braided. So you'd have it twisted and wrapped like this, and here the wraps kind of came undone. I think another interesting feature is the lack of a backstrap on the sword. So you'll see the grip is completely open. Your hand grips leather and metal binding all across up to this last point where the pommel cap. It moves kind of high up the grip, I would say a third about up the grip. So it's a very comfortable sword to hold, but definitely not on the light side. Moving to the pommel cap, let's see if I can get a good view on it. So you'll see that the pin actually is protruding here, so the tang comes out full way. But we also have this extra nut or cap here, which is a little twisted here. So you can see that basically the pin isn't pinned directly into the pommel cap, but there's this extra olive-shaped button basically on which it's pinned. I'm sure some of you also already noticed, but I'll still mention it just in case for those who didn't or are not familiar with the feature that is so typical in many Italian military sabers. But this model lacks the thumb placement that many of these sabers have. So in many cases, if you're not familiar, you kind of have a recess in here in the grip that kind of pops out here as a little cap, and that's to place your thumb to comfortably hold it in position. This model here does not have it, and instead where the position where the thumb recess would go, there's a little hole, and that is because you have this ring that here is loose, and it has a little tip to it here, and this would kind of fix, you can see it go here, and it fixes into that hole, and that would kind of keep the whole assembly in place. I'm assuming the wood shrunk and there would have been something to hold it all together, but that's gone now. And before we move on to the blade, I'd just like to call your attention for a moment on the, I think, really beautiful patination on this sword. So the whole assembly, blade and hilt, are this lovely, I don't know if it comes through on camera, but it's like a warm brown. It probably looks, yeah, I think you can see it. And I find it to be an absolutely beautiful color, whether that is exactly how this was designed to be, or if it's the process of time going by. In any case, this is not something I would change. As for the blade, this is a pretty heavy-duty blade. It's not the heaviest I've ever handled, but it is meant for business for sure. You have a ricasso section here, and then you have this rather thick spine that runs basically about 4/5 of the way, I would say. And then it kind of pretty drastically thins down into the tip section. And to strengthen the blade and remove weight, you have a very broad fuller. You'll see it kind of covers 2/3 of the width of the blade at least. And this goes pretty far up, about to the point where the spine starts thinning down. And while it's a very broad fuller, it's also rather deep. And what's interesting, and I think the reason why it's kind of deep, is that here, where the ridge, the bottom ridge of the fuller is, the blade is actually quite thick. And that's because it allows the blade to have a very nice and very strong tapering. So you have an edge here, but it's not just like a pipe back edge that is rather thin. It goes from rather thick and it thins down dramatically. The blade itself is not sharp. It does have a few nicks. It has a very thick, wide, and flat, rather flat spear tip. It's dull, I would say. This is not a tip I feel like I need to be too careful with. Of course, if someone is charging me at full speed on a horse, yeah, that's probably going to go through me, whether or not I'm wearing padded clothing. But like on normal handling, this is a rather dull blade. You can say I can run my fingers on it without fear. And one interesting thing I think about this model here, I think it comes through, I hope it comes through on video, but you'll see that the counter edge here, the false edge, is actually quite damaged and beaten up. So whether this was due to use or training, or I have no idea what the historical reason would be for this, but you can see that something has happened to this sword at some point in time, and very concentrated on this section of the blade. Other than that, there are no other markings. So the sword, apart from the oh, sorry, I didn't mention the maker's mark, of course. But you can see here, there's a something written, and it looks to be a Hartroft. Hartroft. I have to confess, I'm guilty of not looking into it before making this video, and I apologize for that. But I'm sure some of you watching will already know who that is, and I hope by the time I publish the video, I'll have that information. So in any case, this was the sword. I hope you like it. Italian swords are, for me personally, really beautiful. I know they are hit and miss with many people. But if you have a chance, please pick one up because they're definitely worth it. Thank you for watching again, and make sure to comment to get a free copy of Matt Ford's La Sciabola, and I'll see you soon in another sword video. Bye.